Hillary has been lengthening her excuses as to why she lost the election. She didn't really lose the election. It was stolen from her by, I think it's up to 24 different excuses she has now. Number 24 is content farms in Macedonia. And as I said, my grandfather was a Macedonian content farmer, and we often think about, gathering on the porch and recalling the old days on the Macedonian. He never thought that the old content farmers he left behind in Macedonia would one day steal the U.S. presidential election. They are gnarled, hard-working Macedonian peasants, and the way they were able to reach out and
against all odds, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland has finally given a majority mandate and clear signal to Prime Minister Boris Johnson to, quote, get Brexit done, unquote. Despite the protestations of former prime ministers, including Tony Blair and John Major, and despite the money of George Soros, the Tories won a convincing majority, giving Johnson and his Conservative Party a wide enough margin to finish what was begun in June of 2016, taking the UK out of the EU and giving the British people something that all freedom-loving people desire, the right to rule themselves. This has implications for Macedonia now and into the future. We'll discuss all of this and more on this episode of the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. I'm Jason Miko, coming to you from the foot of the Catalina Mountains in Oro Valley, Arizona.
And this is Cvetin and Jason calling in from Skopje, Macedonia, where we are more than ready to join the European Union and take the British place and replace this huge loss for the unification of Europe.
Well, maybe that has something to do with the fact, I noticed, at least on Twitter, in which all diplomacy on the planet is conducted on Twitter, of course, now, that both Zoran Zaev and Nikola Gruevski, Zaev and Dimitrov did not congratulate Boris Johnson, at least on Twitter. Maybe they did on Facebook, maybe they did privately. But I noticed a Balkan Insight article, which is useful at least for something, that noted the congratulatory remarks coming from leaders in the Balkans, and they didn't mention Macedonia. So I'm not sure if you are actually going to take the place of the UK because Zaev and Dimitrov didn't congratulate Prime Minister Johnson, which I thought was kind of odd. So normally you see Dimitrov saying, "My dear Boris, congratulations on, my dear this, my dear that." It's always, I don't understand that, but anyway, that's a weird thing that he does. But
I'm sure he did this privately, but it's very funny how the Brits were our main supporters in joining the EU, and we all saw that, and many in France also saw this as a perfidious British plot to bring in so many new countries into the European Union, especially substandard members, to make the union unworkable. And now that they are out, we're losing a major supporter. However, no matter how ridiculous and ironic it all sounded, but we're losing an outspoken supporter whose support, on the other hand, made it, I think I've been mentioning this here as well, made the French even more wary and annoyed at the idea of enlarging the union. If the Brits are for it, then the French are against it, and this is, I think, how it worked. So
yes.
Thanks, Boris, for helping Macron block us, I suppose.
Yeah, indeed. So, well, this is obviously we've been following, what's going on in the UK for a long time. I remember I was in Macedonia at the time of the Brexit vote, and I was staying in a place. I actually didn't have internet access where I was staying, and my phone. Long and short of it was I didn't have access on my phone or anything else. Anyway, I had to call up a friend of mine to ask how the vote was that morning, and he said that, and I was expecting Brexit to fail. And it was literally, to me, it was like Christmas morning. I thought that was the great, and then of course, all these years of frustration, and finally, we get to that point where, and Johnson staked his political career on that. But the whole point was to be able to control their own future. And as our friend Dan Hannan, the British member of the European Parliament, soon to be out, I guess, has said, the EU is fundamentally an anti-democratic project, and so that is why the majority of people in the UK wanted to leave the EU in the first place, and now they've essentially, this was the second Brexit referendum, the one that that Tony Blair and George Soros were calling for, and they were defeated. Of course, as we know, the European Union, when a country votes quote unquote wrongly, the people have the chance to vote again to get it correctly. And in this case, the UK basically gave a big middle finger to the EU.
Or you just arrest enough members of parliament until they vote your way and do what you wanted to do.
Exactly. So anyway, so that's...
If Soros wanted to stop the UK from leaving they should have toned down the migrant crisis. It was really, the vote was happening at the time. If you were here at the time, you remember then all the migrants milling around around Skopje, and this was the pivotal point. You remember Farage had those billboards with streams of people flowing from Greece into Macedonia and further north, and this was I don't think they would have had the same result if the referendum happened in a different time, and all those guys on the left who were inviting the migrants to come, organizing the NGO network along the way and legal support, etc. They should have toned it down if they really wanted the UK to remain. This was really, you stay in the EU, but we are at the same time proving that the EU is completely dysfunctional and can't maintain its primary function of a union, which is to patrol its external borders. And we were here, hopefully we contributed to this as well by being so efficient in moving the migrants north.
Well, that's where they want to go. France, Germany, Austria, Sweden, of course, etc., and whatnot. But anyway, well, again, still, Macedonia as a member of the European Union is a long way off, even if the EU finally decides what its new criteria is going to be for accepting new members, etc. And then there's the whole issue of Greece, I think, keeps saying that Macedonia should be tied with Albania. Which is basically a way of saying you're not even gonna get talks opening up anytime soon, because Albania certainly isn't.
And which is a violation of the Prespa Treaty, although a bit indirect.
The Prespa Treaty, what's that? Let me think here.
Something that some guys signed.
So that's like a Paul Krugman column, I think. So very few people will get that reference, but anyway. So let's look at the news this past week. Our friends in Bulgaria, the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences, decided to come out and say that the Macedonian language is not really Macedonian language; it's a Bulgarian dialect, as the Bulgarians have done for years. This has been one of the big things that they've been harping on. So that's not news. And Zaev's reaction, of course, not really news, but basically Zaev said, at first he said he was going to respond, and then afterwards he said he wasn't going to respond. So what's his latest position, since he keeps changing his mind and refuses to condemn it?
No, he spoke on the phone with Boyko Borissov, and when he called him, the position was that he will send a protest note from the foreign ministry to the Bulgarian foreign ministry against this. And then Boyko obviously reminded him on all the dirt he has about Zaev, and Zaev backtracked. It's widely considered after the racket scandal that people in Bulgaria, maybe Borissov's circle, have compromat on Zoran Zaev, given that the wiretap, the recording in the racket scandal, this businessman was being extorted by Special Prosecutor Katica Kamchev, that he had help from Bulgarian people in recording the movement of the money, how the money was taken from him, the blackmail, and it's widely believed that this has all ended up somewhere in some circles in Bulgaria, including allegedly a GPS tracking map. Kamchev was very conciliatory to Zaev. He said that he did not bug the bag of money, that that Zaev was not extorting money from him directly. But then somebody from Zaev's circle apparently was publishing another leaked conversation Kamchev had in Bulgaria, in which he says that the bag is bugged, and he even said where the bug was, and so it's very likely that somebody has the movement of the money and know where it ended up. and all of this could be made public if Zaev misbehaves. And this is why the Bulgarians are so eager to keep him in power in Macedonia, so that he could continue delivering on their priorities, which is, as you said, getting somebody in Macedonia, if not necessarily the academy, at least the parliament or a commission approved by the government, or education ministry, to approve on a piece of paper that says that Macedonians, maybe the Bulgarians would acknowledge that we are currently self-identifying as Macedonians, not necessarily speaking a Macedonian language as we saw, but they would grant us the right to self-determination. But they will ask that at least until 1944, until the creation of the Macedonian Socialist People's Republic in World War II, that at least until then everybody of note in Macedonia was a Bulgarian, the church was Bulgarian, the culture, the songs, the historic events, that this is all Bulgarian. And you're maybe a very recent creation as an independent nation state, but you have no other attribute of nationhood. This is what Bulgaria wants Macedonia to acknowledge.
Of course, right. And we saw the letter that I don't know if it was leaked or not, but the letter from the Macedonian Foreign Ministry to the Greek Foreign Ministry, that just came out, I think, in one of the media outlets, that affirms, quote unquote, affirms that the Macedonian identity doesn't exist. That you can call yourselves Macedonian, but you're not actually ethnic Macedonians, etc. And that's all part of this so-called Presbyterian, and going back to your position on Bulgaria, and it ties in with Zaev's continued what's he trying to dilute or deny the Macedonian identity, but all of this ties in, I think, with his desire to stay in power, and including, and I know we're getting ahead of ourselves here, including his desire to form a pre-election coalition with Dewey and Ali Ahmeti, because for the simple reason that he wants to stay in power. Now, moving ahead slightly, let's see, today is, we're recording this on middle of December, so Sunday, December 15. This is episode number 52. It's going to drop tomorrow on Monday the 16th, likely. And we can start counting down the days until Zoran Zaev is no longer prime minister, which is January 3rd, in advance of the April 12, 2020 elections. Of course, he'll still be behind the scenes pulling the strings and whatnot. But it'll have a little less power, I think. And this goes to how we opened this podcast talking about the UK and how their vote essentially was a vote for self-rule. And so the question I have today is, do Macedonians want to, rule themselves, or do they want somebody else to rule them? Zaev being propped up by the internationals and by Bulgaria and the Greeks, etc. I don't think he represents self-rule. Sorry, you were going to say something there?
Yeah. As in other countries, we have a sovereignist party now and a globalist or non-sovereignist party, and we had it for a while. I mean, Bulgarians like to say that VMRO is supposed to be the pro-Bulgarian party because, by default, because SDSM was the pro-Serbian party or pro-Yugoslav under Yugoslavia. But that's not exactly right. VMRO was the pro-sovereignist party or pro-independence party in Yugoslavia, and had an accidental overlap of interests with Bulgaria, who wanted to see Macedonia out of Yugoslavia and removed from the Serbian zone of influence. But this was their goal. VMRO's goal was to remove Macedonia from Yugoslavia and outside of the Serbian zone of influence. But as a Macedonian state, and even, if we are engaging with Bulgaria, it's to have Macedonians in Bulgaria, have our own positions imposed on Bulgaria through Macedonians living there. Hopefully, unify Vardar and Pir in Macedonia in some fashion. So, for a while we have an overlap with the Bulgarian interests, and you could sense Bulgaria supporting VMRO at times, especially before the 2001 war. But now that Bulgarians are no longer satisfied with Macedonia leaving the Serbian orbit, now they want us to make another step in their direction in acknowledging that we are Bulgarians. I mean, this is mostly for domestic political purposes for Borissov. It's accomplishing nothing. In fact, it's actually defeating his own point because he's annoying many people who were otherwise be positively disposed to Bulgaria. But now they want us to undermine our own sovereignty and accept Bulgarian imposition in Macedonia. And here we see that VMRO is resisting this. And in some circles in Bulgaria, it's seen as well, they are now becoming a pro-Serbian party because they're opposed to us. They cannot comprehend that there needs to be, and there is, as there should be, a proper sovereignist option in Macedonia. While SDSM, who have, as we said, been the pro-Serbian party, but pro-Yugoslav, but in essence they are revealing themselves to be anti-sovereignty. They're not as much pro-Serbian as they would rather pawn off Macedonian national interests, the Macedonian nation state, to whoever comes along, so long as this leads to them being in power. So they would trample over their long-stated positions of socialism, left international, blah, 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 and want to join NATO and the EU, but the goal of this is to gain power. They're using EU and NATO membership as justification for their seizure of power. They would sign the treaty with Greece and Bulgaria, not because they are now moving from a pro-Serbian to a pro-Bulgarian position, but because this helps them stay in power through their international supporters, and because they essentially have very little sovereignty, very little sense for sovereignty left in them after all these decades under Yugoslavia. This is tied to the fact that, to get a sovereignist option, you need people who own land, people who own factories, people who own businesses, self-made people, the intelligentsia. This was all destroyed by the left in Macedonia after 1944, after the communist takeover. And if you have a country made of people who own nothing, whose only employment comes from the government, who would, live off of EU grants or Soros money, they would not be pro-sovereignist. They have no stake in the country, and they're obviously not sovereignists. So this is the division we have here. People who have achieved something in their life, they want to have their own country and be proud of it, and they vote VMRO, and people who are this bizarre mutant version of the proletariat. They have nothing, they live comfortable lives, but honestly they have nothing to leave to their children, provided they ever have one. They are anti-sovereignty. And whoever comes along, even though it's completely contrary to what their fathers supported in Yugoslavia, now it's Bulgaria, they're willing to sell themselves to the highest bidder.
Right.
There will be Albanians tomorrow, or Turks. They will be welcoming the Turks with baklava tomorrow if the occasion occurs.
Sounds like that. Then you just gave a interesting, both a kind of a description of the past and almost a preview of the future, especially as it relates to the upcoming elections here in Macedonia, and those who are willing.
The return of the Ottomans.
These people are willing to sell their own souls. Not only sell their own souls, but sell the souls of their deceased ancestors, which is a total violation of the trust that those who came before us have given to us. This is something we like to quote Chesterton on this podcast, much to the chagrin of our friends on the left. But Chesterton's Democracy of the Dead, that we owe our ancestors, those who came before us, a voice in the present and in the future because of the sacrifices that they made to allow us to be where we are today. And so in Macedonia's case, that is a sovereign, independent Republic of Macedonia, and yet you've got a significant number of people there now, including the current government, who are willing to sell to not even the highest bidder, frankly. They're just willing to sell out for a few crumbs. But then you've got the sovereigntist faction, and I like that word, which is represented in the center right, mainly in Numero de Pamene and others. And that's what this election, I think, is going to hinge on. Those who believe that Macedonia should be independent, sovereign, that Macedonians should take control of their own future, that there should be self-rule, that the Macedonian language and the Macedonian identity and Macedonian history should be not only taught but encouraged, and something to be proud of as well. So I see that Citizen just had a big event at the, oddly, at the Boris Johnson arena. What was that all about? Was that a pre-election wingding?
Yeah, as you said, Zaev is at his last legs in the government, and he organized, he had like a bunch of rallies across Macedonia. This was the big event. I foolishly tried to go there for some other reason, and I was turned back, and you could see dozens upon dozens of buses. So practically very few people from Skopje apparently came, but he really had like a huge number of buses parked all around the Boris Johnson sports arena, and then close to it is the City Mall, which is very popular with Kosovar tourists for shopping, and practically a quarter of the city was like bumper to bumper of buses bringing people from Kosovo and people from, Zaev supporters from Strumica and across Macedonia, which, again, you could just count the Kosovars as his voters as well, because this is his only growing voting bloc. Every poll shows that he's losing badly among Macedonians, so he will have to import some voters. Nothing of substance. I can't say anything of substance came out of this.
What's going to be his... Did he have a preview of kind of what the theme of their campaign is going to be?
Well, they're hoping to join NATO by the time of the elections, and they can skate on pictures with Queen Elizabeth, with Boris Johnson, with, when they were in London.
On the USS aircraft, USS Harry Truman aircraft carrier?
Yeah. That's a corny thing. No self-respecting leader would accept this kind of visit, right? Am I wrong?
That what?
I don't see this type. You wouldn't see the French president, going off to visit, to meet with an American general or even the American president on a aircraft carrier. Like, look at me, look at my big ship. It's not really.
Yeah.
Borissov was there as well, but I don't think you would be able to see many self-respecting leaders.
I agree. What I like, besides the ridiculous pictures of Zaev and Sekerinska and Talat Jafari with their goggles on and their flight suits, etc. My understanding is that Sekerinska tweeted out a picture. I forgot what the plane was in the background, but she said they repainted. Plane. Yeah, she says they repainted the tail with the flag of Macedonia. And she was roundly criticized and made fun of and ratioed on Twitter because the tail was actually the state flag of Arizona, which is similar. So if you look
Arizona block us now from NATO membership.
I will call the governor, Doug Ducey, right after this and ask if he can do that. But the tail was, the bottom half was blue, the upper half was the rays emanating from the center, which is the exact color of the style and colors of the state flag of the sovereign state, the Grand Canyon state, the great state of Arizona. So I'm not sure. Yeah. So she looked ridiculous, and was obviously ridiculous, and pointed that out. And you're right. No self-respecting leader would do such a thing. But hey, they got a ride to the aircraft carrier, and got to meet with the bigwigs in our military, etc. So, but as you pointed out, the Bulgarian Prime Minister Borissovs was also there. So he looked just as ridiculous. Or maybe he was trying to pressure Zaev a little bit more on the whole denying the Macedonian identity thing and recognizing Goce Delchev as a Bulgarian.
Yeah, sure. No, Zaev announced he would go visit Borissov early next year. Even he will no longer be prime minister, but he would like to continue these types of campaigning as if he were still prime minister, and to continue selling Macedonian national identity to the highest bidder.
Not even the highest bidder. They'll take the middle bidder, it seems.
Yeah, to whoever has compromise on him, he would dance for him. But this is what they're going to campaign on. He would then go to Sofia. He would take pictures with Borissov. Borissov famously, tried to record a meeting with Mitskovsky and talk substance and at the opening of the meeting, which is usually not done. And then he live streamed all of this on Facebook to help Zaev essentially, and help himself. He's presenting himself as the big boss, and decent Macedonians, even though who would be normally disposed to look favorably on Bulgaria, we don't like this type of humiliation. It helps Borissov in front of his own voters, but it's actually destroying Bulgaria's relations with Macedonia. Nikola Gruevski wrote extensively on this, as if he was trying to advise Bulgaria from a friendly position, not to sell a strategic issue such as Macedonian Bulgarian relations for temporary bump in the polls. This is what Zaev and Sekerinska will campaign on. And even though, it's so rotten, it's so bankrupt inside, I'm going to do a preview, or I'm actually going to give my farmer's pick earlier in the podcast. I was going to mention there was like an exhibition recently, and there is like one of these artists who was hired by the leftists during the Colored Revolution to make posters, flags, blah, blah, blah. Kardula is his name, some Vlah name, Zoran Zlatko, not sure about his first name. So he would do like graphics, and he would do like pictures of the women fighters from World War II, which were, most of them were lefty communists or were posthumously, declared as leftists. As many of the partisans were, but be that as it may, he was definitely painting them or photoshopping them from a position of a far left guy presenting, as the left here used to do for decades, the heroes of the war against Bulgaria, by the way, and these were presented in an event organized by Sekerinska. She showed up as an old lefty she is. And this was, I suppose, I'm pretty certain, was paid by the defense ministry. This is where we're spending the money we are promising Trump, I suppose, will be spending into defense. But this defense ministry is having us join NATO. Precisely the contrary of what these women who this Kardula person painted, these fighters, fought for. They were fighting for a socialist revolution. This is how they're portrayed in the history books. And now you organize an exhibition of their pictures, of their portraits, by a ministry whose other main purpose at this point is to portray us as, to promote our NATO membership. And this shows you how rotten and how skin deep the dedication, the commitment will be of this lot to NATO. I mean, it would be ridiculous to talk about values here, Western civilization, free markets, things NATO is supposed to support. They would happily sell NATO secrets or whatever to whoever comes along to replace NATO, be it from the East or from the South, from Africa or whoever. And another defense-related, thing that makes your stomach turn is that we're now sending troops to Mali. Have you heard about that?
No. What's going on in Mali?
Pendarovsky announced this. Well, France has some kind of like a colonial fight there with ISIS, I suppose. Okay. And they recently lost like 13 soldiers in a helicopter accident in the mission. And we already committed a couple of soldiers, liaison officers, to some EU mission in some other West African or something state. Mm-hmm. But now Pendarovsky is out and he says, which I predicted months before, as soon as France mentioned they might block us. Now Pendarovsky is saying, and we're now negotiating sending like a contingent, not just like a few token officers, but like maybe a platoon or something to Mali. So we are now going to try and get Macron to approve our EU membership by sending soldiers. And there is a very funny picture it's now funny, the First World War, when France and Britain and the Serbian, remnant of the Serbian forces and whatever were pushing from Greece toward Macedonia.
Right.
And Bulgaria and Austria and Germany were holding the line from the north. And some of the most horrific fighting we ever experienced here happened in the First World War. Like Bitola was badly destroyed. My city where my family lived at the time in Doiran, it was completely destroyed to the point it's now known as Nov Doiran and built a couple of kilometers to the south. And the funny thing is that these were British and French forces here, but there were also a lot of colonial troops, including, you can easily see in many pictures, black African soldiers from the Légion d'étrangers, the French Foreign Legion.
Yeah.
So now, 100 years ago, France was sending Malian troops to Macedonia, and now France is sending Macedonian troops to Mali to pay back the favor. It's complete disaster.
It comes full circle. So, but Pindarovsky is thinking, to your point, that it helps by sending Macedonian troops to Mali in support of France's mission there, whatever that happens to be.
Yeah.
This is just another way of saying, to Macron that we're your loyal partner. We want to get into the European Union, etc. And I don't think it really matters how many, quote unquote gestures of goodwill Macedonia makes towards France. France is now the leader of the European Union, especially as the UK leaves, and especially as Angela Merkel fades rapidly from the scene. And it's France is El Jefe. They're not. No matter how many gestures of goodwill from Macedonia or Albania or anybody else, they've got their own agenda and they're going to pursue it. And they're apparently not listening to many of the other EU countries in their appeals for Macedonia to become a member of the EU right away, or at least to start accession talks right away, etc. They're going to go at their own pace, asserting their own power and position as the leader of the European Union. So, while it might be a nice gesture for Pindarovsky to send Macedonians to Mali, as funny as that sounds, it ain't going to do anything. So, oh boy.
Yeah, it would be a very poor new EU member. I mean, that's for sure.
Yeah.
At least the way the country is operating right now.
Yeah. Well, let's switch subject slightly. I think in our podcast last week we had just we touched on the Venice Commission. But the full ruling of the Venice Commission, or their statement had not been issued, that the law on languages in Macedonia, which essentially makes Albanian a almost a co-equal language throughout the entire territory. The Venice Commission basically came out and said, not so fast, guys. This is not good for the country, especially in the judiciary. The Prime Minister, of course, said that previously that he would abide by what the Venice Commission said. Now he's, of course, reversed himself, as he is very good at doing. We should send him some flip-flops.
Yeah.
That's what we should be doing. We should be sending him flip-flops in winter. So then, of course, all the Albanian parties came out and said, no way in hell is this going to change. We're keeping this, etc. What's the latest you hear on that, and where do you think it's going?
Yeah, as you said, Zaev flip-flopped. He initially was insisting that he would respect the opinion, and now the French ambassador is obviously saying, "Mais non, mon chéri, mais." The Venice Commission is sacrosanct. You have to follow their opinion, and this will likely become an issue for. Not that the French is like us that much, or would like to have Macedonia remain as much of a Macedonian nation state as possible at this moment, but because it's, again, gives them what the Greeks would always do. They would like to look for a technical, actual issue, actual reason to block us. Non-adherence to the rule of law would be this reason. Instead of blocking us, just they don't like how we look and how we talk and how we dress. The Greeks were always at pain to find reasons to block us, like actual structural, substantive reasons, and now the French are assuming this role. They're doing it for the Greeks. Other than that, yes, as you said, VMRO is proposing amendments to the law which would make it constitutional. Clearly the biggest issue, which the Venice Commission does not touch, because it says that it's being adjudicated at the moment by the Macedonian Constitutional Court,
Oh, that's true.
And the
Yeah.
Macedonian Constitutional Court is afraid to actually do it. Vomero submitted a challenge to the law on the ground that after the 2001 war, the peace treaty, this is as far as the Albanians could go. They managed to secure the Albanian language at the moment of major Macedonian defeat. So this is as much as they got at the time in terms of concessions, that the Albanian language will be official in municipalities where this is necessary and reasonable and useful and serves a purpose, which is where there is at least 20% Albanians, but not in other municipalities where there are no Albanians.
Right.
And because it's too expensive, unnecessary, and changes the nature of the Macedonian state and opens up a whole new can of worms, as all these treaties with Bulgaria, Greece, and the Albanians actually open at this moment.
Right.
So it's unconstitutional on this ground that the law makes the Albanian language official in Dilčevo, Štip, Kratovo, where there are no Albanians. But the Commission says, no, we're not going to give our opinion on this at the moment because you have a procedure there. But the other opinions of the Commission are also very damning. It says that it would make the judiciary unworkable, that it's poorly written. It's meant to look like, the Constitution is meant to look like. It doesn't mention the Albanian language, it mentions the language of the 20% and applies to other minorities. So in theory, in practice actually, in the Roma municipality of Šutka, Roma are over 20%, they get all the rights Albanians get. This is a virtuous position of defenders of the Constitution. But now in this law it says it interchanges, it uses intermittently Albanian language, the language of the minority group.
Right.
The Albanian language, the language of the 20%. And it makes a complete mess out of things. So the Commission says it's not even clear what you're talking about here. It's just bad prose. So there's a bunch of issues here. Vomero would propose amendments. They're still not published, but I suppose they would roll back the use of the language just in municipalities with 20% Albanians. Albanian parties say, listen, where they say that this would make the judiciary unworkable, would impose on Macedonian people working in public administration to know the Albanian language. Albanians say, no, this is not an issue of the law, it's an issue of resources. So give us much more money to hire translators, and this could work. And this is their position. No need to change the law, just give us half the budget.
More public sector jobs, right.
Yeah, of course,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah.
So this is where we are. And Zaev is hoping that this would help him make Vomero more difficult as a partner for Albanian parties in the future. Vomero is, it's a relatively moderate position. They're not saying we're going to throw out the law outright. We're going to make it workable and fall under the Constitution. But they're obviously pocketing this other issue which the law brings, which means that France now has an additional reason to demand that Macedonia adheres to a politically very hot potato-ish decision of the Venice Commission.
Well, right, and then you mentioned a couple times the 20% issue, which of course comes from the Ohrid Framework Agreement of Ohrid Framework Agreement. Framework Agreement. Bloody hell. From 2001. Now, what we haven't had in nearly 20 bloody years is a census. And so we need to know what is the population and what are the percentages of these, whether it's the ethnic Albanian minority or one of the other minorities. And, of course, I know a few months...
elections now,
elections, and then the census
again, we're going to see that Albanians vote in mid-40%, in the mid-40s, while Macedonians vote in the mid-60s. So this tells you that even lower, actual Albanians, if mixed with Macedonians, you would get like a majority Albanian district would vote in the mid-40s. Albanians alone could even vote below 40%, but they are on the rolls. And then turnout picks up tremendously in the last half an hour when
they stuff the ballots.
Realizes that he's losing and they stuff the ballots.
So, well, we need a Macedonia needs a census, and it's got to be done soon, and it's got to be done correctly, and that's probably going to be for the new government to deal with after April.
Yeah. It was supposed to happen early next year, but because of the elections, it's being postponed, and that's for the best because Zaev wanted to have it done through Skype. So Albanians who do not live here, because the Albanian issue is that many have emigrated out of the country, so they would be allowed to call in from Skype or just email their documents, and they would count as residents. They wanted to, because the census is to count the residents, not the citizens. They're not being stripped of citizenship, but they are, we just want to have you tallied as a resident. We want to know if you're a resident or not, but Albanians are afraid to allow this, and they insisted on Skype census.
That's laughable. That is just laughable. Oh. But I'm not laughing, so anyway, all right.
And welcome back to the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast, episode 52. Cvetin in Skopje and Jason, Miko in Oro Valley, Tucson, Arizona, which apparently has a very similar flag to Macedonia, as Sekerinska recently found out to her detriment. This is the portion of the podcast where we do our farmers picks. I actually did mine while we were discussing Radmila Sekerinska and the ridiculous exhibition of socialist women fighters our NATO inbound military was organizing. Jason, do you have a farmer's pick prepared?
I do, but before I give the farmer's pick, I just want to mention, because I noticed this before we decided to start recording, that Balkan Insight, our friends there on the left,
my dear friends,
put out an article noting 20 different podcasts about the Balkans that you can listen to during the winter months. But naturally, of course, that they didn't include the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast, because they're frightened of conservative thought and conservative policy, and they wouldn't deign to give us any ink. And frankly, I'm not sure if we'd want it coming from them, to be honest with you. But
they're petty and vindictive.
That's true. Yeah.
They took me to court. Did I tell you this? And I actually beat them. For some stupid slang. Yeah, it was ridiculous. Even it was so stupid. Even in this court, and in the Zaev controlled court, they couldn't win.
Excellent. All right, but that's my farmer's pick. Okay, so I always liking and wanting to end on a good note, on a high note, and in this case, literally on a high note, on a good note. And one of Macedonia's greatest cultural exports, Simon Trpceski, is touring, and he's going to be, today's December 15th, this is dropping tomorrow, the 16th. He's in Austria the next couple of days, 16th and 17th, but then for listeners from the United States of America, he will be in New Jersey in January, in a couple of different places, and we'll put a link to those dates and places that he is touring. I don't know, let me see as I go through here. Okay, after New Jersey, then he comes back to your side of the pond, is Slovenia, Ireland, the UK, a couple of different places. So, but he's touring, and one of Macedonia's greatest cultural exports. So that is my farmer's pick, Cvetin.
Yeah, Simon is great. He was recently in Uzbekistan, and this is the place where many of the Macedonian of the children which were expelled from Aegean Macedonia, nowadays northern Greece, blah blah blah. After World War II and the fighting and the civil war in Greece, a bunch of children were sent there. Many were, families. Many were Macedonians were born there because Yugoslavian communists wouldn't take them in because they feared they're a different kind of communist. I'm not sure if we've gone in depth on this issue. We should sometimes. And Simon was playing in Tashkent, and he actually dedicated the entire concert to the Aegean Macedonians there, and to their memory. And apparently, one of his teachers, it says Nikola Gruevski, he was apparently deported in Tashkent, and he dedicated the concert to his teacher and to the Aegean, to the Macedonian Aegean tragedy.
Very cool.
Yeah,
good on him.
He's a great guy.
Yeah, he's a great cultural export and a great ambassador for Macedonia.
Yeah.
Well, that wraps up our episode 52 of the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. Always great talking to you, Cvetin.
You too, buddy. Take care.
You too.